And so if we can get Kevin to kind of come on here, I think he'll be, I have to promote Kevin and them as speakers. I'll let Kevin introduce his panel, but Kevin is with Defiance Ventures. He's been a great mentor and partner for us for a number of cohorts, I think 2 or 3 cohorts now, and really enjoy his leadership in that. And I'll let him kind of frame up the discussion with the panelists, but we're trying to find something that would appeal to the founders in the room and also the corporate folks in the room about how we bring these 2 worlds together. I know we're a little behind schedule, Kevin, but we're going to keep the panel to the 25 minutes we talked about. And then after we're done with the panel, we're going to move back into networking in that general room you saw. So please hang with us. And when we move back to that general networking, again, you'll be able to network with all the founders at their table and have more in-depth conversations with us. So please enjoy the panel and continue to stay with us afterwards for some additional networking. And Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. So this is really, really timely given the welcome class, right? So a lot of these companies are going to spend their time trying to sell into the large financials and create partnerships. I've spent most of my career in the startup world, running through these hurdles, lots of times face first. So anything we can do to try to help give a leg up and also maybe give some of the people in the room the alternate view of what are these startups facing when they try to go through it. So with me, I'm going to have Teresa Burton from USAA, Andrew Gowasak from TrustStamp, and Cor Hoekstra. Did I get that right, Cor?
Close enough.
Close enough, we'll take it. From Amicus. So I want to first thank them for their time on the panel, and we'll jump right in with the first question of, can you take 60 seconds and just describe your current role and company? And Andrew, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So my name is Andrew Gowasak. So I'm the president and one of the 2 co-founders of TrustStamp. TrustStamp is an AI company, and we focus on empowering enterprises to authenticate users' identities while protecting their privacy. And so we do that by converting all their PII into irreversibly anonymized tokens that protects it from hacks and leaks and lets it comply with regulatory mandates. A lot of my time is spent building strategic relationships, both on a customer side, but also with third-party partners and channel partners as well.
Thanks. Cor?
Thanks. So Cor Hoekstra, I've been called a whole worse, so it's all good. Co-founder and CEO of Amicus.io. Amicus is an early-stage fintech company, and we have created a donor-advised fund, DAF 2.0 platform for the top-tier financial institutions in North America.
Great, thank you, Cor. And last but not least, Teresa.
Hi, thank you for including me. I'm in with some good company here. I'm with USAA. If you're not familiar, they are primarily focused on military and military families with all their financial needs. I am in a role of supervision and controls, which basically boils down to risk, identifying risk, helping mitigate risk. I work with internal and external audits, our regulatory exams, et cetera. So basically, I'm the primary resource for our enterprise IT third-party management. So I help us identify and mitigate risk.
Great, thank you, Teresa. And since you were the last one to speak, why don't we jump in with you first? So,
sure.
When you think about these startups coming to try to do business with, let's take a USAA, right? I've been a member there for, I don't know, 22 years now. Love it. But that is a massive organization. So what is the hardest, or what is the biggest mistake that a company can make trying to get through procurement? Is there any just hard stops, do not pass go, do not collect $200 that you've seen before?
Absolutely. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with being a young company. There are so many things you can do to prepare. So one of the biggest issues is not properly preparing. Because if you have the slightest bit of insight on financial institutions, they need to ask you a bunch of questions, especially if you have access to their customers' data or to the customers themselves. But a couple of things I wanted to point out, if you boil it down, financial institutions are looking for strategic alignment to their business, meaning business specific benefit. So if you don't have something that'll benefit them, that's just not going to work. Secondly is compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. Heavy emphasis on regulation. That's just a no go. If you cannot be compliant with the regulatory environment that the financial institution has to be, then it just can't work. Protecting customers' data and protecting the customer experience. Obviously, that's huge, and that leads into protecting the financial institution's reputation. If you have a breach, it's not you in the news; it's the financial institution.
Right.
So those are some big things. Obviously, this is a huge subject around risk, but those are the basics to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. And then looking at the other side of that, and I was going to start with Cor, but Andrew, we'll start with you on that side. What is the hardest? What are the biggest procurement hurdle that you had to overcome while bringing TrustStamp into some of these organizations?
I'll keep it down to 3. So one of the hardest hurdles when we first started was just all of the InfoSec questions.
Mm-hmm.
Getting prepared for all of it, making sure you answer it satisfactorily. I guess one of my words of advice and encouragement to the startups is expect back and forth, like expect them to ask you questions. Like you should be more worried if they don't ask you follow-up questions, but be prepared and reply in a timely manner. Don't let it hang out there. These people don't want you being that one case that they can't get off their list. Like be respectful of their time, get back to them quickly and get through it, because the benefit is once you do it once, and as long as you take kind of good notes for yourself, it's easier the next time round. Like they eventually end up asking the same questions in different ways at different organizations. And as long as you have some notion of what that is, it's easier the longer you do it. So after you get over that first hump, it gets easier. I'd say the other 2 hurdles, and this is just a factor of, protections and controls. One of the hardest things is sometimes getting approval from people that you never get to meet. Somebody in legal may need to sign off on what it is that you need to do. You may never meet them. You will get secondhand information from your champion, and you need to be sure that you're ready to go to give your champion the right answers, because they are putting their name, their political capital, their goodwill on the line for you. Don't be a pain. Just understand this is part of the system. You may never get to meet some of these people who will sign off or not sign off on some of your requests. The last one, and again, this is something that's kind of unique to startups, is be prepared to dialogue. Don't be dogmatic. You're inevitably, if you are bringing something actually novel, going to have to work through some gray areas with the compliance folks, for example. A lot of what you're doing is brand new and not even the regulators have caught up yet. But you have to work with the compliance folks to show, here's how it works, here are the risks, here's how it does comply with existing regulation, and here are some of the things we can do to remedy areas of risk. Like, work with them, be respectful of them. They want this to work, to Teresa's point, if there is good business, gains to be had on the other side. But a lot of what you're going to do is going to be in a gray area, so just come prepared for that.
Thanks.
100% agree.
And Cor, what about from your side? You're a SaaS platform, right? So what is the biggest hurdle that you've experienced in the procurement side to garner some of these big partnerships?
So I think Andrew and Teresa, we're talking about compliance, and really hit the nail on the head in the sense of Amicus. Actually, happy to share, we just, like a couple of weeks ago, attained our SOC 2 Type 2 completion, and it was a Herculean effort to get there. That being what it is, because that's simply a prerequisite to show up on the playing field. I think one of the bigger challenges when selling into banks, let me just put it this way: selling into banks is hard, especially in the context of the larger banks and in the context of the regulatory environment as it is today. So the key is finding your economic buyer. that is typically a C-level and is like an EVP or higher officer of that bank. To first of all, find that right person that can be your executive business sponsor is finding a needle in a haystack. So sometimes it just takes a very long time to identify the right person, never mind getting in front of that right person. Let's say you know who that person is, right? And you've done your homework. Then, to Teresa's point, being able to articulate your value prop, but not from your company's vantage point, really from the perspective of your economic buyer. Know their pain points, know their strategic agenda, and know how you can not only help your customer, but also help that person in their role relative to their particular career aspirations and what success looks like for that particular executive in the role that they have and perhaps in the role that they aspire to. It's kind of basic sales one-on-one.
Right.
Finding that person, being able to get in front of that person, and like then let's say your value prop is strong and you're able to articulate and communicate that in a proper fashion, then the challenge becomes now you have to start, in essence, multi-tracking, because there will be validation on your solution. There will be typically what I would recommend is as fast as possible, start the legal process in terms of negotiating an MSA, because believe it or not, and I will not mention any names, it can take as long as 9 months to get that done. And start the activities with the risk and compliance teams. And if, to Andrew's point, if you've gone through that cycle and you are enterprise ready and you are proven, it will get easier. But that first time around is tough and is hard. But it's worth it's worth the pain. Let's just put it that way.
So that's an interesting piece you hit there. So real quick over to Andrew. Have you had to do a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001?
We haven't had to do a SOC. We use AWS for a lot of our customers, and has its own SOC 2 compliance, which they've accepted.
Oh, nice.
So haven't had to go through one ourselves yet. So I know the day's coming.
Yeah, I think that guiding principle is, and Teresa can keep us honest here, but if your solution is customer facing in the context of the bank's property, then that typically automatically means that you are a candidate for SOC 2 type 2.
Yeah, I would agree that you're a candidate, but I'll be honest, it's not necessarily a requirement. But what it does is it gives the assessors that reassurance or that extra assurance from an unbiased and respected source. But to that point, smaller companies, this is an expensive thing to have done.
Absolutely.
And as you said, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it may not be the risk reward worth at that point in your company size. And that's okay. Because we'll just provide you with our 500 or 600 questionnaire, and as Andrew talked about, 1 million questions and back and forth on the IT, your network, your cybersecurity, and you mentioned AWS. We always require the SOC of the cloud, but I'd like to add a caveat to that: is what is it specific to your service that you're using AWS? Are you taking advantage of the security controls that they have available? And so there will be more in-depth questions around that relationship. But yeah, we know we have a SOC for AWS, Azure, and other cloud services.
So Teresa, I want to dive in on that, what you just said, right? Because we've been on the receiving end of at least 15 of those 500 question risk surveys. What kind of timeline should companies think about adding to their sales cycle to get through the security and the risk and the compliance aspect of that sales cycle?
Yeah, so that's going to vary. And Cor mentioned that it can take up to 9 months to get an MSA drafted and signed off and get through compliance. But some of the suggestions I would have, we said it in the beginning, be prepared. So let's say you're a 2-man company and you wear multiple hats, but that doesn't, you can still outline your framework. You can create what you would do for background requirements, code of conduct, privacy, training. Even if you're only 2, you can build this as your company builds. So the more you have created and established in that sense, the faster that the assessment will be. And understanding, they're going to look for roles and responsibilities, access control, monitoring. And if you're using cloud services, that shouldn't be too hard to outline, but making sure you have the proper security and controls in place. One of my biggest advice, don't access their data. Don't access their customers. There are many services that you can provide to where you don't need that data, and only take data that you absolutely need and get rid of it when you don't. Those are just some simple, ideas. And there's a million more. API security is another huge one, because that's where you're getting into the microservices and things. And there are doors, right? And there are windows open that could be taken advantage of. So understand that your cloud service is our 4th party, which means we need to understand that you are controlling and mitigating that relationship just like we are with you. So those are some other things. Payments, you need to know PCI, DSS. If you're not PCI compliant, then you're using a 4th party who is PCI compliant, hopefully, or yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. Know your regulations. What industry are you? What areas are you in? Like I said, payments, that's PCI. If you're doing work for the customers and having direct contact, understand fair banking and FCPA and consumer protection laws. And just be prepared with that kind of stuff, because those are the questions you're going to get around compliance, around legal. And I would bet that most of you have an upper hand on the technology piece, the cybersecurity, the IT. But do some extra studying around the compliance and the privacy, and just basic procedures and policies. Just start them, have them in a framework that you can build on.
That is really great feedback, Teresa. Time and time again, we've seen startups that come into a sales cycle and are scrambling to go and buy security documents and compliance documents and rebrand them with their name on them. Andrew, I want to switch over to you. It's pretty well publicized that TrustStamp has a large partnership with MasterCard. That's actually, I believe, where you and I met, was MasterCard as well. But going through that procurement process, was there anywhere in that partnership where they pushed you to be better, and where you wish you would have done that before you would have started, so you weren't scrambling?
Not really. Let me qualify. There was no way really to prepare for it, because the only way to prepare for it is when there's a commercial justification for it. And it was basically proving that our technology could work on a massive scale. Now, proving that out beforehand wouldn't make commercial sense. Like, there was no buyer on the other side. But once, they put us through that, that was a huge feather in our cap. Basically, the way they did it is they brought in one of the largest consulting firms in the world and brought in their specific identity group. And they put us through, I think it was a 2-month audit period, where they tested performance, where they tested, scalability, they tested integration with other services, et cetera, and even looked at, the uniqueness of the technology. But to your point, the part that makes you better is we came out the other side with this 3rd-party report, which is the part about us is now ours, that we can reference with future customers and say, hey, this well-respected consulting group went through all of our stuff and said it was cool. Not only that, it scales. So, we couldn't have gotten that on our own, but definitely coming out the other side of that was hugely valuable.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it really is that you don't know what you're going to need until you start getting asked for it inside of those sales cycles. It's interesting too. Each company is just a little different.
A little different.
And
the nice part about it is, and again, I want to give people hope. I don't want everyone to go home and hang up their spurs. It gets better. Again, going through the MasterCard one was hard and different from our first customer. Our first customer was different from the third one, but like the end result is I think our first procurement process took something like 3 months, maybe. We just turned around one of our latest ones in like 2 weeks.
Wow, that's impressive.
And so, but again, it's because you do the preparation, you keep the notes that you wrote to yourself last time you did this. You take the advice in the back and forth, from the last time that you did this. And again, as you do this, you sometimes get these fun little nods, again, like a report, which, can give them a little more assurance that, you're not a shyster who just rolled in off the street. It gets better.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And just a quick note, be open to different arrangements. Maybe it's a collaboration. Many companies are now creating a group who will work with fintechs because they want this new technology. They want to stay on the cutting edge of online banking and all of these things. So they're kind of creating partnerships to help you grow and help them, stay on the cutting edge.
Great.
Yeah, and I want to ask Teresa something just because I want you to keep me honest here. In the latest one that we did that went so fast, we were reminded not much of this is binary. A lot of it is a scale. Like you will get a different score depending on your replies, and that will determine whether or not the project is allowed to proceed. It's rarely just a pure pass fail. Is that fair? Absolutely.
Yes. It's a maturity level. And it's also a willingness to work with them. They may find some things that don't meet their minimum standards, but that's okay. They'll tell you, and then you can have a mitigation period and say, okay, we won't go live until we fix X, Y, and Z. So yeah, it's not a pass fail, and it's not I'm going to get you. It's a relationship. It's a collaboration.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think like the process that we went through as it relates to SOC 2 was the initial assessment and scorecard of the 500 items in the spreadsheet. I think we have 65 items, 65 to 80 that were flagged for remediation. And then based on the strength, right, of the relationship with your champion or your executive business sponsor, you simply start working through that when you get to the point of mostly effective.
Yeah.
And typically there's these stage gates, like to your point, like don't invest a whole lot of effort when it's not commercially reasonable to do so. Like when you are in a pilot, the bank has a certain set of parameters in terms of what they can and cannot do. When you then transition into employee testing, again, similar set of parameters up until the point where you soft launch and the criteria become more stringent. But it's, tenacity and persistence has a role here, and it's simply putting one foot in front of the other. I would say, like the other point, and this is sales one-on-one, and this is a word of encouragement to the founders, is as you prepare for these things, right? One, parallel track most of these processes in terms of procurement, your pilot, any risk and compliance. That's one. The second would be consistent, right? Because it's a gradual peeling back of the different layers of the onion, and consistency builds credibility in the sense that, yes, you can put forward a set of high-level policies as part of your first response. Your second response just needs to build on that versus contradict it. because then you're really not working very, very effectively. And third is be responsive, which is a point that was made earlier, because as you work through these processes, like the switching cost, in terms of vendor switching costs for a bank is just unbelievably high. So you're being evaluated as a long-term house guest. So behave as such, right? And leave that, be prepared, be courteous, be attentive, be responsive, and then you simply will get through this, and it does get easier.
Well said, Cor. I appreciate that. So we're coming up on 6:25. I have about 4 or 5 other questions that I could ask you and continue to talk about this for hours, because I find this topic very, very fascinating, how different it is, and the hurdles that you just go through time and time again. But I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for being here and putting up their time. I really appreciate it. I hope the audience found it as insightful as I did, and I'll turn it back over to Dan to take us off over to